Good afternoon everywhere, wherever you are. I assume it's probably your home. And thank you for joining. I think probably the best thing to do is if anyone has questions along the way, it would be fun to make this interactive. But probably the best way to do that is to put them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. And if Tamar could help out in just flagging them if I miss them. So good afternoon. I hope everybody is healthy, well. This is not the first shiur or class I've done on Zoom, but it is the first class I've taught in Pirkei Avot in what's perhaps a very long time. And I had to review it when they asked me which Mishnah I wanted to choose, and one jumped out at me for this particular time that we're in, and I want to use that as a jumping off point to perhaps look a little farther into the future. And the Mishnah, which is subdivided differently in different versions of Masechet Avot, starts the following: Hu haya omer, he used to say or would say, Kol shema'asav merubim mechochmato, chochmato mitkayemet. In now Perek Gimel, Mishnah Yud Bet, it says he said or used to say that anybody whose actions are greater than his wisdom will persist, will sustain, will continue. V'chol shechochmato merubeh mima'asav, and anybody whose wisdom is greater than his actions, ein chochmato mitkayemet, his wisdom, despite it being greater than his actions, will in fact not persist, will in fact not sustain, will in fact not last. And then he continues, Hu haya omer, he would say, Kol sheruach habiot nochem menu, anyone who finds favor in the eyes of people, of humanity, ruach hamakom nochem menu, God is pleased with him as well. Ein ruach habiot nochem menu, if humanity and people do not feel a positive towards him, they don't have good feelings about him, so to God, so to God doesn't have good feelings about this individual. This, of course, raises a bunch of questions. We're all familiar, I'm sure, with the Talmudic expression that the reason we study, the reason we learn is so that we can do. However, this Mishnah creates a contingency. The contingency it creates is if your actions are not greater, seemingly in quantity, than your wisdom, so your wisdom will not persist. Meaning, there is an undermining of one's wisdom, one's learning from a lack of action. Moreover, we tend to have this metaphysical belief that if we just learn, if we study Torah, if, as the Rambam says, Maimonides says, we study the ways of the world and the ways of God, so we're kind of on the right path. But in fact, it is not just the actions that is perhaps more important, or underlie the wisdom, but if humanity around me, not just knowing God, but knowing humanity and interacting with them and having them have a favorable impression of me is fundamental to God, to Hashem, having a kind view of me. The other thing, I think someone just asked for the chapter. This is Perek Gimel, the 3rd chapter of the 12th Mishnah. The next piece of this that I want to dig into before going back to answer the question is this Mishnah starts with Hu haya omer, he would say, which points us back to the previous Mishnah, because we need to know who is the author of these words. And if you just read the part I read in isolation, it would be interesting enough. This becomes even stranger when we contemplate who is the author, who is the sayer of this Mishnah. And if we go back one, which I don't think you have in front of you, to the 11th Mishnah in the 3rd Perek Yud Gimel Mishnah Yud Aleph in Masechet Avot, it says the following: Rabbi Chananya Mendoza Omer, Kol shirat cheto kodemet lechochmato, chochmato mitkayemet. He who that his fear of sin comes before his wisdom is his wisdom will persist, will last. Somebody whose wisdom precedes his fear of sin, his wisdom will not persist. Here we have a different kind of contingency. Here we have one of order rather than of a quantity. Excuse me, there's a dog that seems to have pulled up behind me here, which will be relevant in a second, actually. So the first part of the Mishnah in Yud Aleph, Rabbi Hananya ben Dosa, is about he whose fear of God or fear of sin comes before his wisdom, so his wisdom will persist. But he whose wisdom comes before his fear of sin or fear of God, his wisdom will not persist. And I think we can kind of understand this a little better, and particularly in the context of the person who said it, which is Rabbi Hananya ben Dosa. And in order to try to understand this, we'll just take a simple example. I would refer to somebody who is perhaps a wise, smart, a chacham, but does not have fear of heaven and does not have fear of sin, as almost a wise guy. He is unconstrained, unrestrained, and perhaps unhumbled by his wisdom. And I think we all take a look at people like that who are perhaps very, very smart and perhaps very, very even wise. But if they do not have fear of heaven, fear of sin, fear of making mistakes, so it gets ahead of them. I think this crisis that we've gone through around COVID, around Corona, actually presents an opportunity to consider this. There were a lot of predictions made at the beginning of this, now what I think we can consider somewhat of a tragedy. So many people have passed away. There were a lot of people who had certainty, some very wise people, smart people, learned people who had certainty about what would and would not happen from this. And I think the lack of fear of being wrong, lack of understanding that life is uncertain, the world is uncertain, has become a trap. And I think some of that wisdom, some of that smarts, some of that learnedness has been undermined by a lack of yirat chet, by lack of fear of heaven, by lack of fear of sin, by lack of fear of getting it wrong. So I think those words from Rabbi Hananya ben Dosa are perhaps unbelievably apt for our time. And as I said, it's a contingency in its order. One either has or I think does not have this notion of yirat shamayim, yirat chet, fear of heaven, and fear of sin, fear of getting things wrong, fear of slipping, fear of making predictions and assurances that are often made or sometimes made by wise people, but we don't anticipate necessarily that there might be some significant wrong or harm in extrapolating from that wisdom. We need to be less certain about ourselves, have a fear of sin and a fear of heaven, in that God knows everything and human beings are limited. But I want to again dig in to who is Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, assuming it is the same person, in order to try to put this Mishnah in even more strange context, we'll call it. So Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was a known miracle maker and was a very righteous man who lived very simply. And just to put it in some context, the Talmud in Tractate Brachot, and Masechet Brachot, tells a story about him, in which they come to him and say, there is an arod, a certain beast that is harming people, And they let Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa know about this, and he says, "Show me his hole." And they show him the hole, and Rabbi Chanina puts his heel on the hole, and this arod comes out and bites him, and the arod dies in his hole. They take it on their shoulders and take it to the Beit HaMidrash. They take it to the house of study, and he says, "See here, it's neither the arod. The arod doesn't kill people. Rather, it's sin that kills people. Achet memit." And at that time, they say, "Oilo la'adam shepaga bo arod." Unfortunate is the person who was wounded, who was bitten by this arod, and unfortunate is this arod that decided to attack Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa and died. This is obviously a miracle, a man of great spirituality, talking about the fact that sin is what gets people in trouble and causes people to die. But there is something more here. Oilo la'adam shepaga bo arod. There are people who are afflicted, who are bitten by dangerous things, by viruses and by arodim. And the Mishnah, the Gemara here is trying to tell us that Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa was undeterred. He saw people were being bitten by this thing, and he went out and risked himself, putting his heel into the hole of the arod. And I think what the Mishnah is trying to tell us is that Rabbi Chanina didn't ask too many questions. This wasn't big scientific research. He had a certain level of confidence and risk-taking on behalf of others, where he was willing to put himself in the line of fire, in some danger, in order to save others. Rabbi Chanina, who was a man of not just great wisdom but great piety, stood out and stood up when it was the right time. And the way he talks about it, much similar to our Mishnah, the Mishnah before, is it's chet, it's sin that or lack of sin that protects, and sin which comes before wisdom, which could undermine that wisdom. And he felt confident in his ability to be somebody who was without sin, to be somebody who was Yarei Shamayim, who had fear of heaven. And this Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa also was known to pray on behalf of the sick. The Talmud in Brachot tells the story that he would daven, he would pray for the sick people, and they would know, and he would say that if I felt confident in Shugura Tfilati Befi, Yodeani Shu Mikubal, he would know that if his prayer was smooth, if it came out easily, if it was well constructed, then the person would be relieved of his illness. But if not, it wouldn't work out as well. And again, he would step up and take responsibility for this and really work at constructing this tefillah. And Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, a man of many miracles, it was even spoken about his animal, his chamor, his donkey, that he was a pious donkey. He was a man of extraordinary piety. And the way we think about people who are pious individuals is they are sometimes recluses, sometimes they stay at home and they offer amulets and they offer wisdom and things like that. But Rabbi Chanina, I think, was a man of action. He was a man who was willing to take risk. He put his heel into the hole. He stood up and took responsibility for others, but it was a responsibility taken not from a place of arrogance, but rather from a place of humility. And I think what we see here in these Mishnayot are a couple of biases that he had, and that I think are important to consider in today's day and age, and particularly over the last few weeks. The first, as I said, is a lack of certainty. We live in unbelievably uncertain times. I've been fond of saying over the last 6 or 7 weeks that many people view what's going on in the economy today, many people view what's going on in the world today as a lot of risk. I prefer to view it as a lot of uncertainty. There is tremendous uncertainty in the world today. We don't know how businesses open. We don't know how buildings open. We don't know when to be open or close. We actually don't even know how this virus transmits itself. And uncertainty is uncomfortable. It's not only uncomfortable, it undermines our sense of security. What Rabbi Hanina, I think, is teaching us is living with uncertainty is very important. That chokhmato, we think we have wisdom. What is wisdom? We think we can control, we understand things. And when we understand things as human beings, we feel in control. But what I think Rabbi Hanina is telling us is we just don't understand everything. And having that yirat hachet, that fear of sin, that fear of making a mistake, that fear of God and understanding that this is bigger than us, and it comes before our wisdom, when we learn to live with that uncertainty, actually our chokhmah, our wisdom, becomes more persistent. It becomes more persistent for two reasons. One is we're able to live with the fact that we're wrong, and we're wrong often. Not only that, we're able to live with the fact that other people can be wrong as well. People who we trust in, people who we view as great, they too are human beings and can be wrong. But I think the second thing is, as people of belief, and not only people of belief, people of interrogation and investigation, it is important to live with doubt. And I'll take two very, very different examples, not to be compared in any way. But the Rosh Yeshiva, where I went to Yeshiva and Yeshivat Haratzon, Rav Amital, often talked about his experience in the Holocaust, and he says he has no explanation for it. He has only questions. And he lives with a belief in God based on all of his questions. And those questions are not necessarily answerable. And forever we will live with the uncertainty and those questions. And I always felt that his wisdom about life and about changes and about things that change throughout time was grounded in a lack of certainty, in an ability to ask ongoing questions. And like I said, not to be compared in any way, but I think science and technology is similar in that way, in that we are investigating. Science is not certainty, it is a thesis. We have a thesis, we attempt to prove and disprove it. And over time, even things we think we proved become disproven. It is a method. But we want to continue to interrogate, investigate, and look forward, and look for truths, look for belief and look for truths, because our yirah, because our fear of being wrong, because of our lack of confidence even in ourselves, underlies and precedes our wisdom, our smarts. We're surprised every day. We live in an uncertain world. And I think these messages of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, Rabbi Hanania ben Dosa, as he's called in some versions of the Mishnah, are critical. But the Mishnah I chose was not that one. It was the one that comes right after it, which started with what I started with. Kol shema asav merubin mi chochmato, chochmato mitkayemet. Here is a quantitative question. Is the time you spend learning, you spend studying, the amount of wisdom you have greater than your actions, or are your actions greater than the amount of wisdom that you have? And I think this is unique. As I mentioned before, he was quite a pious man, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, and yet he was a man of action, not a man of talking, not a man of learning, but a man who was of action, and not just any action, but he was a risk taker on behalf of others. He stuck his heel into the hole where this vicious arod was, and I think that story in the Gemara is not an accident. Rabbi Hanina is trying to tell us something super important here, and that is, as I mentioned, we live in uncertain times, and we can be forced into what is referred to in common parlance as analysis paralysis. We can dig into things and keep learning them, keep studying them. People who don't learn or study at all don't have much to add, but we can also overstudy and overlearn things. And what we need to do is become what I referred to in the title of this talk as men of action. We should prefer action over study, not action that is what is called in Hebrew paziz, or fast and furious and just action for the sake of action, running around just for the sake of doing, but considered action that's on behalf of other people. And I think this is the continuation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is making a point. Hu haya omer kol sheruach habriot nochai menu, ruach hamakom nochai menu. If people are pleased with this person, so too is God. And there is a deep point here. This, in fact, influences the first thing. What is the reason that I act? Do I act impulsively, what I called paziz before? Do I act impulsively, or do I act on behalf of others? And in fact, the contrast here, I think, is not impulsive versus only considered, which I'll come back to in a second, but rather impulsive versus on behalf of others is what drives me to act, my own need for action, or is what drives me to act that I want to act on behalf of others. And therefore, he who other people are pleased with, so too is God, because it informs why I did this action. Was this action driven by my needs? I got to do something. I'm cooped up at home. I got to do something right now. Or was it done in a way that provides help, pleases other people? When I take a risk, is it out of my sense of the thrill of risk, or my sense that I must do something on behalf of other people? And I think the other thing this action does is it informs us of the persistence, of the longevity of somebody's wisdom. I again say, he whose actions are greater in quantity than his wisdom has longevity, his wisdom will persist. What kind of actions are we talking about? We're talking about actions that ruach habriot nochai menu. We're talking about actions that people are pleased with, things I did not do myself on behalf of myself because I was impulsive, but rather things that are done on behalf of other people. And therefore, these actions enforce a couple of things. One is, I did these actions out of a sense of learning, out of a sense of wisdom, out of thoughtfulness, things I had thought about because it was based on a lifelong of learning. I went out and took these actions in a considered manner on behalf of other people. Again, not for my own impulse, not because I had ants in my pants because I was cooped up at home for a long time, but rather I thought about it. I took action on behalf of other people. This then tells me that my wisdom, my chokhmah, the things that I've learned over time were put into use. And when things are put into use, we all know that when we act on something after learning about it, it has more persistence. But it's not just that. It's thoughtful action on behalf of other people is what God is looking for. What does it mean? You should read this almost backwards. It means if people don't appreciate what I've done, so too God does not appreciate what I've done. Now, why is that? Because if I learn God's Torah, God's ethics, God's world, and I still act impulsively, I still act out of a sense of selfishness because I got to do something, not because it helps somebody else, then I haven't really learned God's way of the world and God's Torah. If I act out of absolute certainty, without consideration that maybe what I did was not right, then that leads to the arrogance or the lack of fear of chet, lack of fear of sin, which undermines all wisdom. And what you have emerging here is a worldview from somebody who is known as a mecholel nisim, someone who would have miracles done on his behalf by God, somebody who lived unbelievably meagerly. The Talmud tells of another story where his wife says, what are people saying about Chanina ben Dosa? He's got nothing to eat on. And a hand reaches out and brings him a leg of a table made out of gold. It's almost like the story about Midas. And then he sees in a dream that in the Olam Haba, in the world to come, all of the tzaddikim are eating on tables with 3 legs, and obviously, therefore, his is missing a leg and would teeter. And they return this gold leg. He is a man who didn't have food for Shabbat, the Talmud tells in another story, and then a miracle happened to him. He lived meagerly on himself, but his worldview, Rabbi Hanina's worldview, is one of action, not staying at home. It's getting out and doing on behalf. It is one of uncertainty. He's uncertain in his own, in how right he is. He might be certain of his righteousness in that he doesn't feel he has many sins, but he's not sure how right he is, and therefore his chokhmah can be accepted, his wisdom can be accepted by other people. His actions are not impulsive and not done because I just have to act. I'm cooped up. I got to get going. But rather because they're thought out, because this is a wise thing to do. I may or may not be right, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to take risks. He risks himself before risking other people. He's not sending other people out to do his behest. He'll take himself out. And then the last thing is all this is wrapped up in a theological worldview, which puts people ahead of God, so to speak. What does that mean? We talk about pious people who can spend all their day praying and davening to God. That is not the piety of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. He says humanity first. God follows humanity, not the opposite. God follows humanity, not the opposite. If I do things on behalf of other people, if my actions are thoughtful, if my actions take risk for myself in order to protect other people, if I have a level of uncertainty that is not arrogance, therefore, then my wisdom that is reinforced by my actions, which is approved by other human beings, is well thought of. And therefore, God will think well of me as well. It is an unbelievably humanistic view of the world and a humanistic view of our own responsibilities in times of extreme uncertainty. To extrapolate a little bit to what we're going through right now. And Masechet Avot is a system of values of ancient wisdom that we all believe applies to today and even to uncertain circumstances like now. There are no quick fixes in life. In general, in this one in particular, I quoted Rav Amital before, I'll quote him again. He used to say, "En patentim," there are no shortcuts. And I think we have a process to work through here. And processes are processes on the health and scientific level, and they're also on the human level. How do we do things during this time in which Ruach HaBriot Nochai Menu, that we can help take care of other people? And we should acknowledge as part of this the unbelievable work being done both by the healthcare workers on behalf of us and volunteers across Israel and obviously other places doing amazing acts of chesed out of selflessness, well thought out acts of chesed in order to keep them safe. And even in cases of the healthcare workers where they've taken amazing precautions, they have taken unbelievable risk on our behalf. And I think it would be fair to say that Ruach HaBriot Nochamehem, that people are appreciative and amazed by the work they've done. And then for certain, God must be pleased with their actions as well and the risks that they've taken. My personal world is not in health, though. It's in economics. By day, I'm a venture capitalist. As you hear from my accent, I was born in the U.S. I grew up in New York, and I moved to Israel 26 years ago. And my daily occupation as a venture capitalist, I invest in startup companies. And as COVID-19, the coronavirus was spreading, or even before that, on March the 4th, I sent a letter out to the CEOs of our companies suggesting that this could be a significant downturn and we needed to be ready for it. But more than that, it was a time of uncertainty. None of us knew where this is all going. And therefore, in uncertain times, one has a different reaction, I think, than when managing risk, as I said earlier. And on certain times, you want to build cushions. You not just want to build cushions, you want to build solidarity with people. You're not hedging risk, but rather circling the wagons in order to get everybody in this together and to build enough flexibility that we can emerge from this. And one of the things I've discovered in Israel over the last 6 or 7 weeks is that people from all walks of life are taking time off from work, taking time off for what to do to see how we get out of this better. I've just come out of almost a 3-week exercise with 70 or so people where we're working to try to see what can the Israeli economy look like, not as it exits this crisis. There's this term, Tochnit Yetziah, or exit strategy. We're not looking for an exit strategy. We're looking for a building strategy. How we can gather some of the best minds, people who have amazing minds but live in uncertainty and want to think about what a more resilient future looks like in order to create a long-term plan for the economy of Israel, not one that is a think tank, but one that is a do tank. And this notion of uncertainty is something that underlied all the work that we did. The fundamental model that we started with was something we called chosen ta'asukati, or employment resilience. At the baseline of it, we said the world is uncertain. Always was, but sometimes we felt like we had more control. Now we feel like we have less control, so maybe these messages can get across. And could we measure and therefore intervene and help families when they have employment and therefore income uncertainty, and help make them more resilient to a changing economy? One of the things Corona or COVID-19 has done is it has given us a portal, perhaps a telescope into the future. There's been an unbelievable acceleration of digitization and automation and online usage. Just look at this. We wouldn't have done this before. I would have appeared, hopefully, at Beit in Jerusalem, and we would have gotten to shake hands. I miss that. But many, many people have become comfortable with parts of technology, whether it's banking, financial services, Zoom, robotic deliveries, or you name it. And that's become a part of our life, and it's accelerated humanity to an automated and digital future by a significant number of years. And we're probably not going back to many of the ways it was happening. This is a new normal of sorts. Yes, we'll go back to a lot of things, but there's some things we will not go back to. And therefore, we need to think through what this all means. And this group that I was engaged with, what we did was we tried to think through, what does resilience in an uncertain future look like? How can we help families, people build more resilience to their income, their employment? How can we help them integrate more technology and automation into their lives and live in a future where some parts of automation and digitization make a lot of the jobs that we consider today to be staples of the economy and will make them no longer relevant and useful. That is a process that was underway already. However, it is accelerating. I'll give a couple of examples. I'm an investor in a company some of you may have heard of called Lemonade. It's an insurance company. Lemonade has no insurance brokers, a profession that's been around for hundreds of years. But it's the fastest growing insurance company in the world. It's just an app. And so, there is a challenge to being an insurance broker. There are a lot of people still employed in banks and in retail. Corona, already prior to Corona, many bank branches were closing. This will accelerate it undoubtedly. The things I need bank branches for are dwindling. This is true of other things. We have an investment company called Healthy.io, which does a urine test on a smartphone. How does that work? You get a little kit to your house by the mail. It comes with a cup and a dipstick, and all you do is put some urine in the cup. You put the dipstick in like you would anywhere else, but instead of being in a lab, having to put it in a $20,000 piece of lab equipment, all you do is take out your phone and snap a picture, and you've got your results right there. And the pharmacy can write you a prescription that'll arrive at your doorstep. And particularly now in the time of Corona, their sales have exploded because we don't want people who need urine tests, whether it's UTIs or pregnancy or CKD patients, chronic kidney disorder patients, to come to labs because we don't want to risk them getting a viral infection. And so all of this stuff, from telemedicine to telediagnostics, to insurance buying insurance without brokers, to banking without branches of banks, et cetera, is all accelerating during this time. And it creates an uncertain future around employment. It creates an uncertain future about the economy, and creates an uncertain future about how we integrate technology and understanding technology into helping people become more resilient. And this requires action. In the words of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, this requires more action, more do tanks than think tanks. It requires us to start training people differently, to start creating resilient employment and very individually tailored solutions to these problems. And to put this in a technological construct, if chokhmah can't happen without action, meaning you need chokhmah in order to get to action, but you need the action to make sure that your chokhmah, your wisdom, is persistent and has longevity. The same is true of information and action. You see governments around the world right now doing lots of things, printing money, etc. The state of Israel has borrowed billions and billions of dollars at not an insignificant interest rate, close to 4%. That's a bill that comes due. But what we need two things. That's money. We need action, but we need action that is built on wisdom and that reinforces the wisdom. And the wisdom in today's day and age is data. And we can't suffice, it is insufficient to have macro data. We need micro data. If we want to really help families, if we want to really help the resilience of the economy and the resilience of families, we must have data and information on those families. And we have to develop more digital tools in order to get there. But then it's not enough to make announcements. It's not enough to make pronouncements. It's not enough to just study the data. We need to do. Families need to see the impact of the actions being taken. Not at a macro level, not for the headlines, but rather real families need to see employment and income resilience coming out of this. And we need to start to put these families first. This is part of Kol Sheruach Habriot Nochaimenu, Ruach HaMakom Nochaimenu. Anyone who humanity is pleased with, so too God is pleased with. We have to make this economy, we have to make the emergence and the building that comes out of COVID-19 and Corona work on behalf of more families, work on behalf of more employees, work on behalf of the economic resilience of more and more people. Because otherwise, I think we'll end up back in a similar place. And we need to do this with a sense both of mission, of risk-taking. The great leaders of our people have been risk-takers. People always ask me, who would I like to meet most throughout world history? That person is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. As the inmates were running the asylum in the old city of Jerusalem before the destruction of the Second Temple, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai risked himself, put himself in a coffin to see Vespasian, and said, "Tin li yavne v'chachamea." I want our Torah study, and I want our wisdom, and I want to get out of Jerusalem. Whereas all the Jewish people knew for 500 years was Jerusalem a temple, an altar, and a house of worship. And I said the inmates are only assigned the Biryonim, the bullies of the old city of Jerusalem, which included his nephew, threatened his life. He could have died, but he took a big risk and saved the Jewish people and crafted our Jewish future for 2,000 years. He was a risk taker and a man of action. And he went against the grain. And it's easy in these times to kind of follow the herd. But I think we need to think about people like Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who were risk takers, who took the risk and put their actions ahead of their words, and who took care of the people around them. And just to finish this out, one of the great ironies of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of the people he took with him was Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok had been fasting for 40 days or longer in the old city of Jerusalem to try to stave off the destruction of the temple. And he was a pious man as well. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai took him with him. And Rav Amital, I've now quoted twice in this discussion. I'll quote again, said, why did he take Rabbi Tzadok with him? Rabbi Tzadok was one person. He was clearly ill after fasting for 40 days. He was weak. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai made sure to take with him the weak, the challenged person to start restart the Jewish future. And I think as we, please God, emerge from this, and who knows if it'll take a month or 3 months or 6 months or 24 months or 48 months, it is greatly uncertain. We need to think about the people we need to take with us to this next building phase of society, this next building phase of the state of Israel. And with that, we need to we need to understand that actions speak louder than wisdom and words, or create the longevity of that wisdom. And we need to focus on a humanity first approach, because that is what God anticipates us. He's not looking for godliness. He's looking for humanity, to look for the Tselem Elokim, the godly spirit in human beings. And when human beings react to us and say, hey, you've done the right thing, then God too will be pleased with us. Happy to take any questions. There's always an awkward end to these kind of Zoom things, because there's no body language, so much to read. But I would be happy to take any questions. You can put them in the chat. I see there's some in the chat. I introduced myself, Harry.